Welcome to Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast for fans who aren't ready to let go, and newcomers to the series who are ready to jump in. I'm Drew Schulman.
And I'm Marie Vigourou. In this episode, we're diving into Supernatural Season 8, Episode 6, Southern Comfort. Let's get this show on the road. Now, everybody, this is your final reminder that I will be at New Jersey Con next week from May 17th to 19th, which is absolutely insane to say. Because again, because of the magic of podcasts, we are still like months away when we're recording this.
Illusions!
But when this comes out, we'll just be 1 week away, and I will be extremely excited. And I will probably already have a list in Notion of all of the things that I need to pack for this particular trip, along with several playlists and podcast playlists for the drive, a whole itinerary of all of the things and the people that I want to see and that I like, the things that I want to do. And it'll be really, really a lot of fun.
I am so excited for you. This is going to be such an amazing trip. I can't wait for all the stories.
If you're eyeing any one of our merch pieces, whether it's the pin, the print, or the tote, order it off of Etsy, follow the directions at carryingwayward.com, and I can hand deliver it to you in New Jersey Con, which honestly, like personal delivery, I don't think we've ever done that.
That is like such a cool thing to offer. I love that we can do that.
That is your last chance to do that without paying shipping fees, so make sure to do that before the date that's specified at carryingwayward.com.
This week, patrons and coffee supporters got to hear us answer the question, what club or bar did you used to go to a lot when you were younger? On our supporter-exclusive Impala Talk feed. You can go to carryingwayward.com to support us and claim your perks.
I am very excited to see what this conversation will bring to us. Do you want to get us started with a recap immediately?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, 3, 2, 1, Texas Ranger.
Garth is back! Garth is back! That's all we need to know! I could say time right there, but I guess I should give a little more detail. Garth is back, and like, Sam and Dean are kind of like weirded out because he's kind of taken over the Bobby role, and he is like, just sort of like, taking the calls and answering things, and it's just like, it's the best, it's so good, I'm so happy we have him back. We obviously have Sam finally reacting to Benny, which is ridiculous and super exciting and crazy. We learn about some Garth history, which isn't really a thing. We get some more Amelia backstory and flashbacks, which, again, there weren't too many of. I'm still not super freaked out by. I'm legit having a blank what the fucking monster of the week was. All I remember is Garth and the boys.
This episode was written by Tim Andrew, directed by Adam Glass, and it originally aired on November 7th, 2012.
Just getting Garth back, like, this soon. But it also feels like a really weird time to do it because it was like right after such a dramatic thing with Benny that it's like such a tonal shift.
You're right. It is very much of a tonal shift, but I think it is one that was needed because the beginning of this season has been very tense between Sam and Dean. Like we're also learning about everything that they've been doing. Well, I mean, some of the things that they've been doing when they were apart, and then to kind of get Garth back is a catalyst for those conversations to actually happen. So it was needed, I think.
As much of a shift as it is, looking back at these two episodes paired together, it's like that was the perfect like transition.
So believe it or not, we have a callback to Amy. As a quick reminder, Amy Pond was the kitsune that Sam kissed when he was younger, and Dean killed last season, even though Sam had specifically asked him not to.
Something about the way you worded that, despite it being perfectly accurate and to the point, it just seems so painful. I think we said this during our live watch of this episode with our patrons, but I legitimately assumed, like, the idea of bringing Amy back up was gone completely, to the point that I had written notes comparing Benny to Amy and scrapped them because I didn't want to dredge up that, like, old thread thinking, okay, the show has put it behind them, it's over. But Sam now literally doing what I wanted to do, just being like, the hypocrisy stick? Whack!
Interestingly, the monster that was queer-coded for Sam is also the one that is paralleled with the monster that is queer-coded for Dean. So fun stuff.
Well, would you look at that?
Would you look at that? This is one of those episodes that really serves, I think, as an exploration of what's going on between Sam and Dean. So we're going to be talking a lot about Benny. We're going to be talking a lot about Purgatory. We're going to be talking about Sam's year off and everything that we've been talking about so far this season. So this is kind of like the breaking point of the last 5 episodes.
There was like a split second as you were saying that where I wanted to like double check what episode number this was, because this feels very like mid-season-y, like let's look at all the threads we've started and like figure shit out, and here it's 6 episodes in and we're doing that. I love that, and it just means we can now explore new threads going forward.
Exactly. This is a Garth episode, listeners, in case we hadn't said Garth enough. And he is looking so good. He's dressed as a cowboy, might I add.
Our little Texas Ranger, I love it.
He's so handsome in this episode, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
We also get a little bit of backstory on Garth. He was a dentist and he came across his first case on the job. He ganked the Tooth Fairy.
I do not think I was prepared for just how amazing that revelation was.
We've been holding it in so hard.
Fairly sure between the two it was Dean who says it, but like making the joke of like, oh, you were a dentist, you killed the Tooth Fairy? And just the, like, you've never seen Garth look more distressed in his life? And like part of me was like, are you upset that you killed it? Like, it's like almost like as if he said he killed Santa Claus. Like it was like something he looked up to the Tooth Fairy like a role model, and then to learn that it was real, and then that it was a monster, that he had to kill it. Like, the range of emotions that face gives. Ugh!
DJ Qualls is amazing in this part. Like, he is just like, what a great cast.
Master.
We also find out more about Amelia's backstory. So she was married to a man. A white man. No. She was married to a man named Don who enlisted in the army and died in Afghanistan. And she's been, well, I guess spinning out of control since then from grief.
I know during our live watch, it was brought up that there are some fan theories that are very well-beloved regarding Amelia's existence.
I think that's right to say.
Even without digging into those, I haven't done it yet. I'm holding out until it's, I don't know when, but I will eventually dig. But even, like, whether or not she is a figment of Sam's imagination or a real person, I like this characterization we're getting of her, in that she has enough in common with Sam without being just, like, a copy-paste of him, but they can, like, relate to certain things the same way, and Dawn or Dean in the losing of someone they care about and how they kind of don't know where to go next kind of thing.
I personally don't subscribe to the fan theory to which you are referring, but we will be talking about it at some point. And I see the merits of it, frankly, I really do. It's a fine interpretation and like a well-documented one, if I can say it like that.
I'm intrigued to know more about it because I love when a theory is kind of like, oh, I can't find a hole in this just yet. Like that's an exciting premise to me. But like, again, I like Amelia. I want her to be real.
This week, our theme is grudge. And the word grudge actually comes from an old French word that meant to murmur, to grumble. I just love the visual of somebody like murmuring or grumbling to themselves for grudge because it's like a constant hum in the background, you know? Like, I just find it to be very accurate of the feeling of holding a grudge.
I literally picture like the very cartoonish, like a character being like, oh yeah, I'm glad to help you, then turning away from them going, yeah, stupid.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Now, the word grudge as a noun, like holding a grudge, is a feeling of deep-seated resentment or ill will. And I think that we see a lot of resentment in this episode. And the word grudge as a verb means to be unwilling to give or admit, or to give or allow reluctantly or resentfully. So again, I think that we see a lot of that in this episode. Even with these like more modern definitions, you can still imagine someone just kind of like grumbling to themselves, like grumble, grumble. I don't really want to let this happen, but grumble, grumble. I guess I have to.
I really like the noun version of it, 'cause I feel like it's like you're physically taking a thing someone did or like has said and like holding on to it as a physical, like, this is the thing I'm mad about. Like, I'm mad at Sam because of the thing that Sam did that I'm holding here in my hand.
Grumble, grumble.
Grumble, grumble.
Now, before we hop onto our characters, we do want to acknowledge that this episode uses the American Civil War as a backdrop. We don't have much to add about the American Civil War that hasn't already been said by like historians, philosophers, and activists, so we just won't be addressing it. We'll do exactly what Supernatural does and just like use it as the backdrop. All right, what's going on with our tallest bean this week?
Number one with a bullet is Sam this week. In only our first, like, what, few seconds of dialogue, we have Sam confronting Dean about his keeping a secret vampire roommate from purgatory from him. And I was betting we would never touch, you know, just how angry this would make him, specifically tying it to the Amy things and the whole double standards in regards to his relationship / friendship with her. Because, like, Dean was very much the, like, the champion of monsters are monsters, and here we go, suddenly changing his game and not admitting it, because I think somewhere deep down he knew it was wrong. And, like, of course Sam has been holding this grudge, you know, deep down and buried away to be able to continue to work with Dean the way he has, but now he has, like, this, like, realization of, like, oh no, I've been hiding this to, like, protect our connection, and here you are basically, like, rubbing my nose in it almost. And, like, again, then the connection to Kate from 2 weeks ago where he's, like, letting her go. Like, then Sam makes that connection, too. Like, this is a grudge that, like, clearly, like, Sam had never let it go, despite the fact there was kind of, like, an air quotes resolution last season about the whole Amy thing. And, like, clearly it's been festering, and this was the boiling point.
I think that we're finding out that Sam hasn't let go of the Amy thing. And again, like maybe it's just being brought back because of Dean's behavior, right? Like because maybe he would have let it go if like Dean wasn't being what he's being at the moment, right? Like because you're pointing out the double standards in this situation. And if I can make that a little bit more explicit, I think that the double standard is that Dean killed Sam's friend in 703 Girl Next Door after Sam had specifically told him not to. And then he justified it a few episodes later in 707 The Mentalists by saying killing Amy was not wrong. You couldn't do it, so I did. That's what family does, the dirty work. And yet, now, Dean is the one telling Sam not to kill Benny because Benny is his friend, the same way that Amy was Sam's friend, kissing and all. I don't know, maybe this is me projecting, so I'm going to be careful with how I word this, but like, if I were in Sam's shoes, personally, like, what would enrage me the most about this situation is that Dean is still not owning up to the fact that killing Amy was, in fact, a mistake. And I think that that is, again, the way that I see it, maybe where Sam's anger and his sense of betrayal is coming from.
He has a lot of trouble admitting he was wrong. I think that he fully knows, like, as much as, like, hey, here's my secret new boyfriend who's also a vampire that helped me escape from purgatory, has many strings attached to it. I think the one that is worrying him the most is the idea of, hey, you know that thing I told you was terrible and I went behind your back and killed someone? I was wrong. Those are words Dean will never utter. I am putting money on that till the end of the series. He will never apologize for Amy or something of that caliber.
Well, I mean, even when he yells at Garth, like, he doesn't apologize later.
But, like, I've known people like that. Like, there is a level of, like, someone doesn't necessarily need to apologize. Sometimes it's not easy for them, but they can make it known they understand they were wrong without ever actually saying it. And again, that's not the best way to go about it, but at least you can come to those terms yourself with that person. And I do not feel that's the vibe Dean's giving off here. At least Sam seems less angry with Garth than Dean does in his attempts to fill the hole Bobby's left in the Hunter community. Like, of course, he's shocked by it, but I don't think there is really any grudge being held here, which I only bring up so we can later contrast it to Dean, who seems to be very perturbed by the whole thing.
I do want to mention that no matter how badly Sam and Dean are fighting, like, they still manage to unite to make fun of Garth, which I think is, like, the most sibling thing that I can think of. But you're right, Sam is less outwardly disturbed, I guess, or upset by Garth's new status, I guess, in the hunting community. I think maybe it's because he's actually had time to grieve, at least more properly than Dean. Like, Dean was in purgatory fighting for his life with his boyfriend, so he had other things on his mind than grieving Bobby. But Sam had more stability in the last year, and he's been able to like take a breath and deal with some of his emotional trauma.
Oh yeah, I would argue that I think Sam had even reached a point in that year where he had like accepted the loss of Dean. Like beyond just the I'm not going to go after him, I'm assuming he's dead. I think the fact that he was able to reach that point and comfort and move on means he was able to process things. And if he was able to process Dean, then he definitely was able to process Bobby. As a sibling, I think there is a level of like, no matter how much we can like fight or like beat each other's like, ends out with each other, there's always that moment where we can bond over like something silly or something that we can like collectively laugh at kind of thing. And like, it's cute that they were able to do that for Garth. Garth doesn't deserve it, but it was cute for them. I want to look at the episode's final encounter with the ghost coin victim and Dean, and how the confrontation reflects for Sam for now. Sam is clearly very aware of how Dean feels regarding his year off and their past, as Dean lists multiple betrayals and clearly grudges he's been holding. The Spirit of Vance is using this to fuel the possession, but like clearly these grudges against Sam like existed, like they're there to be used as fuel, they're not being made up. Dean points out they were all choices that Sam made. And I think Sam never expected Dean to have forgotten or forgiven all of these transgressions, because I don't think Sam's ever forgiven himself of any of these actions.
So Sam's talked a little bit about his own approach to guilt before. Like, I think he said something like he did a lot of bad things and a lot of good things, and he was just kind of hoping that in the end, the good would outweigh the bad, right? Like, he said something like that at some point.
I think almost word for word, yes.
At first, I thought about betrayal, actually, as the theme for this episode, because that's what so many of the people who get possessed by the specter are claiming, right? Like, they claim that they were betrayed. Mary was betrayed by Chester when he knocked boots with Sarah Alcott on prom night 35 years ago. Then Scott was betrayed by Jeff when Jeff ran their business to the ground. The deputy felt betrayed by the sheriff when he asked him to do paperwork. And the other deputy felt betrayed by the ump, who said that he stole second. Now, I'm kind of chuckling because I'm sure that you're going to notice that there are some big betrayals in that list, and then there are some little betrayals, right? Like, it's not all "you left me to die in purgatory," you know? Maybe the deputy doesn't like to be told to do paperwork, but it is his job. And like, there's also the fact that other people have touched the coin and nothing happened to them. Everybody has felt betrayed at some point or another. So it's not about the betrayal per se, but about the inability to let it go. Yeah, what made the Spectre pick these people specifically is that they held a grudge against the people who betrayed them. And I think that Sam, even if he hasn't forgiven himself for the bad that he's done, he's been able to kind of like leave that in the past, to let it go to a certain degree, right? And clearly Dean hasn't. But we will actually never know that for sure, because Sam never picked up the coin. So we don't know if the Spectre would have possessed him or not.
That's interesting. I kind of like that as like a thought experiment. Like, what would Sam do if he picked up the coin? Ooh, I'm sure that's been theorized to the, like, burnt to the ground theory-wise.
Maybe. I don't know, actually.
While writing my notes, I kept landing on the word betrayal. Like, I definitely use it multiple times today. But I think you're right. I think there's a level of feeling betrayed versus holding on to that very specific thing, that literal noun grudge, grumble, that leads you to that feeling. And while Sam has, I think, accepted them more of like, yes, I've made those mistakes. They were wrong. Ultimately, they did not pan out the way I wanted them to. But to go back to the quote you used, hopes that it will balance out in the end and ultimately he'll be doing more good than bad. I think Dean still holds on to those little grudge nuggets. The difference between remembering something you did wrong and not being okay with it versus holding on to something someone else did wrong and using that as a source for your feelings towards them.
I do want to chat about Sam and Amelia's relationship. I do think that there's a degree of like begrudging there too. So Amelia tells Sam about Dawn while they're like lying in bed, and the next morning you can tell that she immediately regrets it. She's like, oh crap, I have trauma dumped on this creepy guy that I just had sex with, and I really wish that I could take it back. And honestly, like, relatable. Like, very relatable, Amelia. This idea of allowing something reluctantly or to be unwilling to allow something that we talked about earlier, like, this is it. This is Amelia in this moment. And it takes Sam kind of leveling with her and sharing his loss of Dean for her to allow this relationship to happen.
It's almost like the grudge that Amelia's holding is against herself for not being able to deal with these kind of things, which kind of leads her to physical rebound and then accidentally emotional rebound, both of which she regrets and looks back at herself as making a mistake. And then Sam trying to explain that, like, no, you're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to do these things. It doesn't make it a bad thing. Because I think Sam's been through similar situations as her in this sense.
And there is one last thing that we need to talk about before we move on to Dean, and that is the end of the episode. Because Sam says to Dean, "Own up to your crap, Dean. I told you from the jump where I was coming from, why I didn't look for you. But you had secrets. You had Benny. And you got on your high and mighty, and you've been kicking me ever since you got back. But that's over. So move on, or I will. And you know what? Hear this too. I just might be that hunter that runs into Benny one day and ices him." I feel like this is really ominous.
I'm so intrigued by this, like, ending because it feels like it's what Sam wanted to say at the beginning of the episode, but talked himself out of, and now is going like, you know what? No. I am putting my foot down. I am no longer playing the victim who didn't look for his dead brother for a year. And, like, I'm going to speak the truth. And this almost feels like the, you did this to me, a la Amy, I might do this to you. Let's see what happens when I meet Benny alone and see how I feel about you then. Like, it's like the perfect line of, like, that's clearly a threat without being a threat.
That is absolutely a threat, for sure. But this is also why I'm saying, like, I don't know what would have happened if Sam had picked up the coin, because I think as much as, like, Sam appears to be, like, you know, it's in the past, it's this and that, like, maybe this is not particularly in the past for him. I think this is very much in the present, and I think that that is very much something that he is holding on to.
If I had to, like, put money on it right this second, what would he do to pick up the coin? It would be this exact, this line, but a lot more vulgar and killy. Less of the, I'm gonna go kill Benny, more of the, I'm gonna kill you now, then go kill Benny.
What about Dean?
I brought up Dean a lot while discussing Sam this week, and it makes sense because most of Dean's grudges are the ones we are reminded of from the last 7 seasons of this show, and the focal point of this episode. Before diving into Dean's side of all the brotherly drama, we should, talk Garth. I think there's this feeling that Garth isn't good enough to be Bobby 2.0, and Dean holds a grudge against him trying. And it really feels like, the mom's new boyfriend trying not to replace dad, but still be like a parental guiding figure. Like, I still want to, like, hang out with your kid and make sure he's cool with me dating you. And Dean is, like, not having it. Like, not even for the daddy issue side of things, but just from the, like, you can't be Bobby. Which I guess kind of does lean on the daddy things a little bit.
So I mentioned earlier that Dean probably hasn't had time to grieve Bobby all that much, if at all, actually, during the last year. And he's actually probably confronted to that fact for the first time in a while. And it's a reminder that he does not like. And this is actually reminding me of some research that I read about incarcerated people and how, like, for a lot of them, the age at which they enter the carceral system is the emotional age at which they're going to leave it. Like, if somebody gets put in prison, actually at age 19, for example, and they come out at 29, they'll come out with the emotional maturity of a 19-year-old. And it's sort of what happens to Dean in this case, right? In a way. Like, he was sent to purgatory. He had no quote-unquote normal human contact for a year, and now he's back. Things have changed. People have moved on. But he hasn't even made peace with the things that happened before he was even sent to purgatory, like Bobby dying, for example. So I can really understand his anger at seeing Garth, like, becoming Bobby, because for Garth it's been a year, but for Dean it's been only a couple of weeks.
We don't know a lot about Garth. We have such little information. Like, we've seen him working with Sam and Dean, but clearly we know he's been doing this on his own for so long. We don't know how much he'd been already doing this kind of stuff in smaller ways until now. We're we are seeing Garth through the same lens that Dean sees Garth, which is this kind of like bumbling sidekick character, and being surprised by these little things. But I would not be shocked if in a future episode we meet another hunter who's known Garth for years and thinks of him in the highest regards because he never had to put him in the like funny little sidekick role. I guess we should move on to Dean's other grudges this week, specifically those against Sam. They are numerous and brought to light. And sure, we know the "you didn't look for me" thing, but Dean's been holding on to his anger towards Sam for years, as it's clearly made apparent here. I'm willing to bet if he wasn't stopped, possessed Dean would have gone even further back to things like, I'm surprised he didn't come up with Sam running away or leaving for school, things that Dean feels hurt him because of actions Sam took. Again, specific actions, things that he can hold on to, actual grudges that were 100%, as we've already learned from Sam, things he did for himself, never intending them to hurt Dean, but Dean was hurt by them.
This was always going to reach a boiling point eventually, and like, here we are. I do want to mention that the betrayal that Dean feels comes from a very real place. Like, I don't think he's dealing with it particularly effectively, but he's doing the best that he can with the tools that he has. And there's one really heartbreaking line that he says, and it's, "Benny has been more of a brother to me this past year than you've ever been. That's right. Cass let me down, you let me down. The only person who hasn't let me down is Benny." And what I'm reading from this is that Dean feels alone and isolated. Like, he feels like he has no one to talk to, no one to trust, no one to lean on. And that is such a lonely place to be. We talked last week about that already. And I think that this line really shows just how much Dean is hurting. And like, sure, we can scoff at him for not being able to let things go, but like, he is in literal pain right now.
The more difficult part of this as a viewer is, while we can look at Dean and I hate to say the term judge, but like look at him and think like, oh, like how are you still? They're all fairly logical things because they're things that hurt him that he has not dealt with. And like, that is again an unfortunate part of his upbringing, who he is, how he handles these things that he hasn't gotten around to or been able to do properly. And hunting life or not, I don't think he has the emotional strength to deal with a lot of these things. I also feel like Dean's always had this sense of like the world falling onto his shoulders, and I think these kinds of grudges are symptoms of that too. Like, everyone's choices that affect him are seen as acts of treason specifically against him. Like, he does what he can to move on for his work, but never forgets or forgives somebody. Like, he's like an elephant in the Jungle Book. Never forget.
What tools does he have to let things go? Like, it's a skill, okay? And that means that you need to practice it. And Dean has just never been given the tools or the time or the space to practice that. And now it's like he hasn't realized yet that this is something that he needs to learn. He's still like way too much in trauma brain to be able to be like, whoa, my behavior is not acceptable right now. Like, he is very much reacting to things still. Like, he hasn't had time to be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be behaving this way. Maybe I am the problem in this particular situation, right? Like, of course, what Sam did was not right. I think everybody agrees with that. But I mean, like, Dean, you gotta move on one way or another, right? Like, you are bigger than the betrayal that has happened to you, right? Little affirmations for you, my love. Just, you gotta be able to carry on, to move forward.
Like I said, a lot of this, again, to play our favorite game, goes back to our favorite terrible father, John, who wasn't a good parent, never raised a kid properly, so Dean doesn't have those skills that a parent would hopefully impart on a child.
Well, so we're actually going to talk about that when we talk about Garth. So what's going on with Garth this week?
Well, Garth is a perfect little bean and has done nothing wrong ever. I just really want to touch on his, like, outburst towards Dean that, like, I said during the live watch I wish Sam had been there for, but really, like, thinking on it more deeply, only Dean really ever had that kind of, like, grudge towards him in his taking over the Bobby role. Sam seemed amused, confused, a little baffled by it, but never like opposed to it. So, like, really, I like that in an episode where I am being very critical, and I feel like we're both being critical of Dean and his inability to handle these things, Garth, his only issue is brought up and dealt with.
Throughout this episode, like, Dean is actually pretty mean to Garth, right? He's taking out his grief-induced anger on him, and again, unacceptable behavior, but he can't quite see that right now. And Garth points it out. At one point, Garth gets upset. His feelings are hurt when Dean says that he'll never be Bobby, and he expresses it to Dean. He says, "Bobby belonged to all of us, Dean, not just you and Sam." And, like, thank you, Garth, for showing us that anger is not a, quote, unhealthy emotion. Like all other emotions, it just needs a healthy release. We let anger go, so to speak, by expressing it, not by repressing or suppressing it. But again, like, Dean was taught his entire life to keep things in and to never let emotions show. So he literally cannot express anger without it being a problem. But Garth just shows him a different way by, like, embodying it. Like, he gives the example by being the example, by being the change he wants to see in the world. And I just love that for Garth. And for Dean, really.
Garth sees the confrontation that needs to happen. He speaks his truth. He lets his anger out in a proper manner and, like, makes it into, like, a moment. And, you know, gives Dean the big boy talk, which I think is very impressive and reminds me of another character from the past of the show. I can't put my finger on it. Who does that remind you of?
Well, it reminds me of Bobby, I suppose.
Ding, ding, ding.
And again, like, we've talked about before about, like, the different masculinities that Bobby and John are expressing in their own ways. And Garth's masculinity is, like, even more removed from John's idea of masculinity than Bobby's was, right? And I think that it helps him not to fall into those toxic patterns of, like, not expressing his emotions. He has much better tools in order to express that. So good for him. We need to talk about Purgatory, and yes, the one in Miami. When Sam, Dean, and Garth are at the bar, there's an exchange between Dean and Garth that goes a little bit like this. "All right, I was in Purgatory." "Like the Purgatory? And Dean replies, "No, the one in Miami." And dear reader, I have thoughts. Because you know what Dean is referring to here? He's actually referring to a gay club. And he doesn't hesitate before he says it, so he had to have known about it beforehand. And we also know that, like, on the show anyway, like, they don't spend that much time in Florida, if any, really. Like, I can't even think of a single episode of Supernatural that happens in Florida. So this one line of dialogue rests on a couple of premises. Number one, that Dean knew about Purgatory, the one in Miami, right? He knew about it. Two, for Dean to know about Purgatory in Miami, he has to have spent time in Miami at some point. Three, he has to have spent time in or around Purgatory in Miami. And finally, four, and I think that that is the most important, that because this knowledge that Dean has comes from before the show started, then I think it's fair and logical to say that while Sam was at Stanford, Dean stopped hunting with John and somehow ended up in Purgatory, the one in Miami. Which is why, when we had that little talk a while ago about, like, what we thought Dean was doing while Sam was at Stanford, I said that I thought he was going around the US, like, slutting it up in gay clubs.
Oh, like, to bring that back to a past conversation, like, you laid the groundwork for this is magic.
You have no idea how much I do that. You'll see eventually.
But I love that I'm getting those payoffs finally. Like, it's been 8 seasons and I'm finally getting some of these payoffs.
Exactly. It's worth it.
This week we have a message from Ruby. Before we listen to it, we want to remind you to send us a 3-minute voicemail. To respond to anything we discussed today or ask us a question, you can use the recording app on your phone and email us that recording at carryingwayward@gmail.com.
Hey, this is Ruby. I just finished episode 15, The Benders, and I have to add something to your discussion of the scene at the bar, which, breaks my absolute heart for Dean, because if this is true that Dean was, quote unquote, going to the bathroom, not in actuality, but because it was a lie, to meet up with a cute person, girl, dude, whoever, in the bar. This is one of the first times that we see something I feel is a continuing theme of the show, and B, one of the possible reasons that Dean falls back into Johnism so hard in this episode, which is that for a moment, Dean forgot or put aside his job as a hunter, his job as Sammy's protector, in order to chase after something he wanted, something he desired, someone he desired, to spend a moment thinking about himself, and instantly got punished for it. Sammy got kidnapped, Sammy got injured, he almost got stabbed, he got handcuffed to a vehicle. This whole episode basically has that inciting incident of Dean staying behind at the bar, and if it's true that he was staying behind to hook up with someone, it's absolutely heartbreaking, especially seeing as, like, I feel like that's one of the reasons that Dean leans so hard on the things he's taught by John. It's because every time he steps out of that or thinks about stepping out of that, someone gets hurt. Something goes wrong. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking, because you shouldn't have to live a life where that is true. And I feel like throughout the show that's not as true for Sammy. And even if it wasn't intended, the amount of time Dean gets punished for expressing his wants, especially when it comes to possible same-sex attraction, is just kind of devastating. So, thanks for pointing out that scene. This episode is... Dean. Oh, Dean.
Oh, Ruby. What, again, the magic of these voicemail lining up with these episodes, the idea of talking about queer Dean in clubs and bars, like the connections. And here is Dean holding a grudge against himself. I mean, like, of course he would blame himself for something like this. You know, he went after something he wanted. He let himself enjoy life for, like, a few minutes. And Sam is kidnapped. I mean, like, no, Dean. Sam's allowed to be alone. He's a grown-ass adult. He's a moose and a half. He can be on his own in a parking lot for 30 minutes. This is not your fault. It's such an amazing thing to bring up. Like, it ties into the episode so well of, like, for all the things we talked about today with Dean not being able to let go of, I'm sure there are a million more things that he blames himself for that he can't let go of in these scenarios. But, yeah, Ruby, I'm sorry to drag you drag that thought out, because it is a really, now that it's all been put together and seen in both directions, like, oh, that is such a, and of course he'd go to the Johnisms, because that's how he punishes himself, by thinking about the person who would be more disapproving of this than himself.
Ruby, thank you so much for this voicemail. I don't quite know how you managed it, but you managed to make the benders even more depressing than I already thought it was. Like, that is a skill. So bravo. I want to look at this episode a little bit through the lens of what you're bringing up here, because I think that this is so interesting. Because if we're using your logic and your analysis to talk about this episode and what's going on so far this season, like, we're seeing Dean falling back into a lot of Johnisms. We talked about how he can't say that he's sorry. He doesn't say it to Sam and he doesn't say it to Garth, right? He can't. That is a Johnism. That is something that John would never have said, that he was sorry. And you're saying that he tends to fall back on those Johnisms, like, after he puts his own desires first, okay? And then something bad happens. Now, with the amount of Johnisms that we've seen from Dean this season, what does this mean about what happened in Purgatory?
Oh.
Right.
I don't like that. Stop it.
Thank you, Ruby. And your reflection this week to share with us.
Garth is best, and I just want to be more like Garth, like unabashedly, unashamedly myself. And I know I give that off a lot in my like online persona, but like I feel like it's not an unusual thing to, like, you know, kind of mask yourself a little bit, kind of hide the little parts of you that you may be considered to be too crazy or too out there. And I know I'm guilty of that, even if I don't mean to. And I think by letting myself be myself more, by being able to embrace me more, I can reach out to people who might also feel like they're not fully accepted or might feel like they need a hand, and reach out to those people and lift them up. So I really want to be, the Garth of my group of people. And you for this week?
Well, this episode is kind of a full circle moment, I think, for me, because, like, I remember talking on here about how I was learning to, like, tell people when they hurt my feelings, or, like, just, like, expressing my discontent when I feel like people aren't treating me the way I ought to be. And, like, I just feel called to continue doing that. Now I can see that it works, right? Like, people have been generally very receptive and have changed their behaviors after I said something. But also it means that I'm not suppressing my own anger. I'm expressing it in an appropriate way. And, like, friends, honestly, if you've never tried, 10 out of 10, highly recommend. Definitely.
This was Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast produced by Rochelle Castellano, hosted by Marie Vigouroux and myself, Drew Schulman. Thank you to everyone supporting us on Ko-fi or Patreon, especially our bunker supporters, Elle, Jeremiah Thomas, and Simone. We'd also like to thank Jake Lionheart for our music, and Jacqueline Tucci for additional sound editing. Head over to carryingwayward.com to become a patron or a Ko-fi subscriber, and for our merch store and socials. And rate us a review on Apple Podcasts. Carry on, our wayward friends.